as a carjacking suspect. In the winter of 2006, several sources, including the New York Times, claimed that he was a former Ba'ath Party official named Ali Shalal Qaisi. And according to a Vienna paper, a self-described independent centrist daily, Qaisi was a Secret Service henchman of Saddam Hussein, a political criminal who richly deserved the treatment he received. And more recently, Errol Morris's film, Standard Operating Procedure, and his blog at the New York Times has gone much more deeply into this. We think we now know who this guy was on this particular day. He was nicknamed Gilligan by the U.S. soldiers. But this picture may have been taken, or this ritual, this position may have been assumed more than one time. So it's possible that it happened, but there is one person under this hood in this picture. But the question of who the man on the box was, like the question of the real historical Jesus, is probably going to remain contested for some time. What I think can't be contested is the iconic character of the image, the way its anonymity, ambiguity, and formal simplicity give it, like the image of Jesus proper, a life of its own that acquires new dimensions of meaning in every context it encounters. Among the many images that emerged from the Abu Ghraib scandal, it stands out as the only one that conforms to Shapiro's concept of the theme of state. By contrast, most of the other photographs are formally complex or even chaotic images of action in which bodies and forms are tangled together or blurred into the background. Or figures like this, conspicuously pornographic and obscene. A second reason for the power of the image is that despite its context in scenes of horror and scandal, it has a curious modesty and dignity. The figure of the hooded Iraqi is not naked. He's not contorted into a stressed position. He is not forced to crawl on all fours, and he's not a decomposing corpse packed in ice. Although the hood renders him anonymous, he appears as a singular figure elevated on a pedestal, an image that conveys dignity and poise that becomes even more remarkable when one reflects on what we know about the event being captured by this photograph. And the most elementary way of doing this is just to project yourself into the situation. Imagine yourself balancing precariously atop a C ration box, cardboard. It's not a very stable pedestal. You have electrical wires attached to your fingers and genitals. You're stifled and blinded by a hood. Sometimes the hoods, by the way, were sprinkled with pepper to make them intolerable. You've already been tortured with electrical shocks to sensitive areas of your body, and you've been told by your torturers that if you fall off the box, you'll be electrocuted. In the context of days of sleep deprivation, beatings, and cries of pain all around you, it would be something of a miracle to remain balanced on top of this box for even a minute. And yet you do it just long enough to be photographed and transformed into an image that will maintain this pose, this composure, as long as the image continues to exist. But I want to pursue a little further this obvious resemblance of the image to representations of Christ with his arms raised, either at the crucifixion or the resurrection, or in scenes of prayer and blessing. Now, I say it's obvious, but it's important to acknowledge that the resemblance to any particular image of Christ is very imperfect. And there will be, I think, considerable resistance, and I know from personal experience, some outrage at the very suggestion that this photograph has anything to do with Jesus or was meant to recall the figure of Christ. People have pointed out to me, if there's any resemblance, it's surely accidental, and of course quite incidental to the real meaning of the image, which is who's there, what happened. For those who care about the political meaning of this image, its resemblance to images of Christ may seem to be a distraction from its real, literal meaning, and even an aestheticizing of a historical document. And for those who care deeply about the image of Christ, It might be deeply repugnant to think that this photograph of an Iraqi prisoner who was a terrorist suspect in a war zone at the time, and at best a car thief captured in a military sweep, should be associated with the Prince of Peace, Son of God, the Son of Man. The resemblance of images of the crucifixion, moreover, is rather tenuous. The crucified Christ stretches his arms upward, not downward. Christ is naked except for a loincloth. He doesn't wear a cloak. His face is visible. And many more things too obvious to mention. These contrasts, I should have mentioned, this photograph was the one that launched the photographs. Sabrina Harmon took this in early October 2003, and in her trial, she was asked, why did you take the photographs? And she said, in this particular one, she said, I came in and I looked at him and I said, that's funny, he looks like Jesus. So I went and got my camera. So there was a kind of recognition scene, even at the moment of production of these pictures. Perhaps it simply has to do with the fact that crucifixion is the ultimate, what's now called by the CIA, stress positions. And stress positions of the human body have a certain limited repertoire. This photo montage from the Chicago Tribune illustrates some of the kind of dissonance between the crucifixion and the Abu Ghraib figure. At the same time, it shows a kind of resonance between the two figures. The question is, what sort of resonance? How can we get at the precise meaning of this image in a way that respects its pictorial specificity as well as its historical and political meaning, while reckoning with its circulation in a world of images and its numerous reframings and mutations? To call the man on the box a Christ figure is perhaps simply to give in to an iconographic cliche, unless we take the trouble to analyze more deeply the other levels of resonance contained in the image. What would it really mean to see this image as Christ, as opposed to all the other modes of seeing as that could be brought to it? I think the answer lies in a deeper reflection on Shapiro's distinction between themes of state and action. There's a related distinction that focuses, this is not Shapiro's, but somebody else's, that focuses not on the formal character of the image, but the state of mind of the beholder. And that's the contrast between devotional and narrative readings of sacred images. A narrative reading of the hooded man provides a date and a proper name to the figure and a provenance of the photograph itself, from its production in the fall of 2003 to its public release in the spring of 2004, and the whole unfolding of the scandal since then. It reads this against the grain of this formal character of the image as, I said, freezing time, stopping time, this moment of stasis captured by the photograph. A devotional reading focuses on that and is contemplative and empathic, slowing down the time of the image to a stasis which mirrors the bodily state of the figure in the mental state of the beholder. It puts the viewer in the position of the figure, a process which is encouraged by the frontality of the theme of state in its blind, face-to-face encounter with the beholder. This, in other words, is a seeing as, which doesn't assume that the image is exhausted by its narrative reading, but asks what it means to live with the image and with the world it depicts. To ask, in other words, what the image wants from us. I think the first thing the picture demands from the devoted viewer, particularly a U.S. citizen, is an acknowledgement of responsibility. To put it in the crudest terms, the photograph and what it reveals was paid for by our tax dollars. We own it and have to own up to it for what it tells us about the state of our union. Even if, like I'm sure many of us here, we oppose the Bush regime, opposed his war in Iraq, we are responsible for this image. As Thomas Mann pointed out,